Grouping. It is key for all the work we've done in the past. It's key for everything we do today, and it's key for the future. In my preparations for my 5 minutes, I also thought, am I going to stay on the ground, or am I going to go high-flying and risk that I don't say anything that's worth listening to? I decided in the end, since my neighbor will probably come with some concrete proposals, I'll try to do the high-fly and hope that I'll say something that you can use. In the 7th Environment Action Programme, we map out, and this is something adopted in co-decision by Council and Parliament, so it's what the Commission and the Member States and Parliament all think alike. We have a 2050 vision on where we want to be. And that vision includes quite a few bits and pieces which have to do with chemicals. We want to live well, we want a sustainable society, and we want a healthy environment. This can only be achieved if we have innovation and if we stay within the ecological limits. I'm just taking the little nitbits that I like in a chemicals context from that vision. That vision puts demands on chemicals, and it puts demand in particular on the innovation on chemicals. And if you look at what that really means, and here I try to get down on the ground, well, chemicals have two types of properties: desirable and not desirable. The desirable properties, that is, it is a flame retardant. It is a good agent to put into plastic to make it soft. And then you have the undesirable properties. Those are the negative environment and health effects. And two observations that I have before I come to my final statement is substances very seldomly get less hazardous with time. I've done chemical regulation for 23, almost 24 years, and I've very seldomly seen a substance get classified with a less hazardous properties. I've seen hundreds of substances where the classification keeps getting worse and worse and worse. I see over the last 100 years, from David Gee and his work on late lessons, early warnings, that the maximum exposure level for lead has gone down by, I think it's a factor of 100,000 over the last 70, 80 years. And I've never seen these exposure limit values increase. The second observation is that desirable and undesirable properties are very close to each other. So grouping, and other words for grouping, again, historic, QSAR, categories, read across, adverse outcome pathways. For me, all of this is all the same. Grouping, I like better because it's a more all-inclusive word for it, is an absolute necessity for us, as it has always been, but it is even more so for Europe in the future, for innovation, for health and environment, and for competitiveness.
Yes, grouping is absolutely necessary, and we do use grouping. So at first I'd like to say some words to my role. I'm with the Federal Environment Agency in Germany, and we are responsible in Germany for the environmental issues among REACH. So we are not responsible for health issues. There are other authorities responsible. This is important, because when looking at the candidate list, there are 22 substances on the candidate list due to their environmental effects, so endocrine disruptors or PBT or VP-VB substance, and 16 of these 22 were proposed by UBA. But now we are running out of candidates due to missing experimental data, and I think many of those substances now proposed for the SIN list are also not fit for a member state committee decision, because we don't have the experimental data for these substances available to decide on if they fulfill the criteria for PBT, for example. Okay, coming back to, we already use grouping. We use grouping for screening for SVHC candidates and also for the substances we like to put on the co-rep. And we use it screening for certain properties like persistency, bioaccumulation potential, or endocrine disrupting properties. And we use it by, we have several algorithms, we have several QSAR models, and we have also the registration data, and we have the algorithms and models ECHA has available to screen the data. We see a need to use grouping for 3 reasons. The first is, I think, we have similar risks due to similar structure and to similar uses. And we like to avoid substitution. It was called regrettable substitution. That's the word I like.
Something you regret later.
I like this word. So we need to avoid regrettable substitution. And there's another reason. It is for market balance reasons, because it might be that we have 2 manufacturers which produce very similar substances, and if we bring one on the candidate list, we have an imbalance on the market. So I think also for this reason it is important to group substances and to bring them in the REACH system with the same time frame. And I have some examples where we use grouping. One of those are the group of benzotriazoles. There was mentioned today this 328, don't know the name, which is on the SIN list. We call it UV328. It's a phenolic benzotriazole, and we have it as a group assessed, and this 328 is already proposed for inclusion in the candidate list, and we submitted the dossier, and for another one in August. They were grouped due to their persistent and bioaccumulating properties. We have another example for grouping, which is in the focus on UBA activities. These are the alkyl phenols. We have already brought on the candidate list octyl phenol and nonyl phenol, and we have some others now in the substance evaluation. They are also promising candidates for the candidate list. And we have the group of the perfluorinated compounds, which are also in the focus of UBA's work. And today, Martin mentioned the precursors of PFOA. So we have also, I think, C8 perfluorinated carboxylic acids in the focus. So it's PFOA, which is the substance we already brought on the candidate list. And we think it's not very good in this case to bring all the precursors also on the candidate list. We decided to go another way. We propose a restriction focusing on this C8 moiety in every substance, and then we restrict every potential precursors of PFOA. And we would like to submit this restriction proposal in this month. I think it will be submitted at 18th of October. So my message is grouping is very important, but we already use it.
Okay, just to follow up on that, do I understand that it is used methodologically and so on? It's not actually in the legislation, but it's a process that you use in identifying, as you said, candidates for the candidate list and so on. If I'm right, and it's therefore not part of the regulation, but it's part of the approach, do you see a role in the long term, and the question to both of you, for grouping in legislation, or do you think it will always remain more a process rather than part of the rules? Christoph first.
Okay. Yes, it's challenging because at the moment we have the concept of one manufacturer, one substance, one legislative action.
Yep.
So that's but we have approaches like this one we choose for this PFOA and the precursors, where we introduce grouping into legislation. And I think that's the way forward we need to go. So we need to draft the legislative measures in a way that we address grouping. So we have one substance of concern, several potential precursors, and put them into the legislative measure.
Right.
So that might be a way forward. And I think another way is forward for grouping is a very good coordination of the activities, so that we look at a complete group as authorities like the perfluorinated compounds or the alkyl phenols, and coordinate these activities between the member states. This is also a good approach forward, so that not every member state is looking at single substances, that we coordinate and say, the Netherlands take over some group, UK is taking over the brominated flame retardants, we are taking over together with Sweden, for example, the perfluorinated compounds. So that a good coordination of the work is also an idea of bringing grouping forward.
Okay. Thank you. Bjorn?
We need no legislative changes. We just need to do it. The way we approached grouping in the pre-REACH legislation was we did it. Under the REACH legislation, we're just not doing it. And I'll give two examples. They're both on the same chemical, group of chemicals. Nickel, done by the Danes in the existing substances regulation and done by the Danes in classification and labeling. Existing substances was chemical by chemical approach, but when you are faced with something which makes scientific sense, namely let's group the nickel compounds into one risk assessment, then you just do it. And we did it. The same thing goes with the classification and labeling. It's a single substance approach, but what the Danes did was they took 136 nickel compounds and they classified 136 nickel compounds based on a group approach. And there's nothing in REACH that says that we can't do that now. So submit a risk assessment which covers a group of chemicals, and then you have a group restriction in the same way as we have group entries in classification labeling, which says, classical one is lead and its compounds, or that sort. It's just an issue of doing it.
So the framework exists. We don't need to write new legislation. Before I go out to the audience, a question I have to ask you about EDCs and the delay. We know it was due in December 2013. You said it would take longer. The Swedish government has indeed since taken the Commission to court because of the delay. Can you explain where we are now and how much longer that delay is likely to be? Just because I'm sure it's a question many of you have, so let's deal with it.
I'll go for it. I mean, let's start with the really, really good news, and then I can come with all the really, really, really bad news.
Okay.
I think I'll do the 30-second good news, and then we can spend whatever time you want on the bad news. The good news is we launched the public consultation. And please submit your answers to the questions, and please definitely use the question which says, do you have anything else you want to say? And submit that via the web forms. The deadline is January 16th, 17th? 16th, thank you. I'm looking at Peter Koretar, who knows the details much better than me. So use that. That's the first step. After that, the Commission will do an impact assessment, or in parallel, we'll start the impact assessment, but we'll use the input from the public consultation to do an impact assessment of the scientific criteria and their implementation in legislation, following the options mapped out in the roadmap. And my expectations are that we will definitely finish in 2016.